Darkness, heavy, suffocating. The kind that presses against the lungs, making every breath an effort, thick with the stench of damp earth and decay. The Pit of Eradon was no mere prison. It was a sentence to oblivion, a place where names, legacies, and even screams were swallowed whole by the unfeeling rock. Here, the forgotten rotted beneath the iron rule of the Zenith Dominion, an empire that crushed dissent with a precision colder than the void between the stars. Daelen Voss had once stood at the helm of rebellion, a commander who had led warriors, in defiance of the Zenith overlords. He had been a man of strategy, of discipline. Now he was a ghost wrapped in flesh, his once powerful frame worn down by starvation and the cruelty of time. His hands, once steady enough to guide fleets into battle, now trembled from malnourishment and rage alike. Yet the fire in his eyes had not dimmed. It had been tempered, made sharper in the crucible of betrayal. The pit was a twisted world beneath the surface, an ecosystem of the forsaken. The weak were devoured, either by the cruel hands of the slavers who managed the depths or by the desperate souls who had abandoned morality for survival. The air carried the sounds of suffering, choked sobs, whispered prayers, the occasional, wet crunch of violence enacted in shadowed corners. Daelen had learned quickly. Mercy was weakness. Trust was suicide. The arrival of the drone changed everything. It came with a whisper of machinery, descending from an unseen hatch in the cavern ceiling, its metal frame illuminated by the glow of its scanning lenses. The slavers stepped back, their usual arrogance tempered by deference. This was no mere delivery of supplies or inspection. This was something rare, something important. The voice that crackled from the drone's speakers was smooth, artificial, devoid of compassion. Trial of redemption initiated. The warden calls for blood. A ripple of murmurs spread through the prisoners, their sunken eyes darting toward the figure at the center of the pit. Daelen did not move. He had heard the stories. Gladiatorial. Combat designed as entertainment for Zenith elites where the condemned could fight for their freedom. A lie. No one ever left the blood crucible alive. And yet he watched. He listened. When the list of names echoed from the drone's speakers, his own was among them. A hollow amusement stirred in his chest. He had been left to rot, discarded, by his own kind. And now the Dominion sought to use him again, this time as spectacle. It was then that he learned of the war brewing above. His former comrades, those who had abandoned him to die, were facing annihilation. The same Dominion that had cast him into the abyss now turned its might against them. They had no chance. No leader. They would fall, crushed beneath the same boot that had ground him into the dirt. A path opened before him, one carved in blood and vengeance. The Dominion thought they had broken him, that he was nothing more than another husk waiting for death. They were wrong. Daelen Voss would not die in the pit. He would rise from it, and when he did, he would make them all pay. The silence after the drone's announcement was a fragile thing, stretched thin over the weight of unspoken fears and desperate hopes. No one ever volunteered for the trial of redemption. It was a slaughterhouse, disguised as an opportunity. But Daelen Voss did not hesitate. He stepped forward, his body battered but his resolve unyielding. If he was to die, it would not be a forgotten corpse in the pit. He would carve his way through the Dominion's twisted spectacle, and he would make them remember his name. The guards dragged him away, their grip firm but wary. They had seen what hunger and despair could do to a man. Some fought their fate. Like animals, others wept like children. Daelen did neither. His silence unsettled them, and that pleased him. Let them feel the weight of what they had set in motion. They took him to the blood crucible, a towering coliseum where the Zenith elite reveled in their manufactured chaos. The air was thick with the scent of metal, sweat, and the distant, acrid sting of blood dried under alien suns. He was stripped, washed, and fitted into crude armor, its jagged edges designed more for spectacle than protection. The guards gave him a weapon, a rusted blade, chipped and dull. It was an insult, a reminder that this was not meant to be a battle. It was meant to be entertainment. The gates groaned open. Light poured in, too bright after the endless shadows of the pit. A chorus of cheers and jeers assaulted his ears, thousands of voices crying out for carnage. Daelen stepped forward onto the sand, his gaze locking onto the towering beast that stood across the arena. It was not human, a Sarkan Warbeast, its flesh a latticework of muscle and cybernetics, its maw lined with fangs that dripped with something, thick and corrosive. The Dominion had engineered it to kill, to tear apart those foolish enough to think they could escape their chains. Daelen did not think. He calculated. He measured the distance, the creature's posture, the way its claws flexed in anticipation. He had led armies against war machines. He had studied battle at the highest level. And yet, in that moment, he had nothing but a broken blade and the will to survive. The horn sounded. The Warbeast lunged, faster than anything that size had the right to be. Daelen moved on instinct, rolling under the swipe of a claw large enough to eviscerate him in a single blow. Sand exploded around him as he landed, twisting to slash at the beast's exposed flank. The blade barely cut into its thick hide, but it was enough to make it recoil, its mechanical implants whirring as it recalculated. The crowd roared, drunk on the thrill of bloodshed. Daelen adjusted his grip. His mind raced through every weakness, every potential flaw in the beast's design. It was strong, fast, relentless. But it was still a machine in part, and machines had limits. It was programmed to kill, but not to think. The next time it lunged, he did not dodge. He met its charge head-on, sliding beneath its raised forearm and driving his blade into the exposed servos at its joint. Sparks flew, and the beast howled, "Ayo!" Metallic shriek of malfunction and fury. The fight was not won, but the tide had shifted. Daelen pressed the attack, using the beast's own momentum against it, striking where flesh and machine met. The blows were not deep, but they were precise, disrupting the synchronization between organic instinct and programmed calculation. The beast faltered, confused, its movements becoming erratic. That was when he saw it, the kill switch embedded at the base of its skull. It was a failsafe, a leash held by the Dominion in case their creation ever turned against them. He had one chance. The Warbeast lunged a final time, and Daelen did the unthinkable. He ran toward it. A heartbeat before impact, he leapt, vaulting onto its back with a burst of inhuman determination. His blade plunged downward, striking the kill switch with all the force he had left. The arena fell into silence. The Warbeast shuddered, its body spasming as the override command ripped through its system. Then with a final, gasping growl, it collapsed. The crowd erupted into chaos, some cheering, some furious, but all watching in stunned disbelief. No one was supposed to survive the blood crucible, and yet Daelen Voss stood over the corpse of the beast, his chest rising and falling in ragged victory. Above him, in the towering seat of power, the High Executor of the Dominion leaned forward, eyes gleaming with dark amusement. The warden's voice echoed through the Colosseum, amplified and cruel. "Impressive. Let us see what you do with the next challenge." The gates groaned once more, and Daelen knew the true battle had just begun. The victory in the blood crucible had sent ripples through the ranks of the Dominion. A prisoner had not only survived, but had defied expectations, turning their twisted spectacle against them. Daelen Voss was no longer just a forgotten rebel. He was a problem that needed solving. He was given no respite. As the gates yawned open once more, two armored Zenith enforcers stepped forward, their gleaming exosuits a testament to the Dominion's ruthless efficiency. There would be no theatrics this time, no Warbeast for spectacle. This was execution, thinly veiled as entertainment. Daelen's body ached, his muscles burning from the previous battle, but exhaustion was a luxury he could not afford. The enforcers advanced with practiced lethality, their plasma blades humming as they sliced through the air. Precision, cold, calculated death. He dodged the first strike by instinct alone, the heat of the plasma blades searing the air inches from his flesh. The second strike came faster, too fast. The weapon tore across his side, slicing through the ragged armor they had given him, leaving a scorched wound beneath. Pain flared, but he did not slow. He could not. Their movements were synchronized. Two halves of a single, relentless force. He was a warrior, but they were executioners. The crowd roared, sensing the inevitable. But Daelen Voss had spent years studying war, dissecting the strategies of his enemies, breaking down their patterns until he found the weaknesses they did not even know they had. He gave them what they wanted. He stumbled, blood trailing from his side, allowing one enforcer to close in for the kill. At the last moment he twisted, grabbing the arm that sought to impale him and using the momentum to pull the soldier off balance. The other enforcer hesitated for the briefest second. It was enough. Daelen wrenched the plasma blade from the first soldier's grip and drove it upward, piercing the weak joint at the base of the armor's neck plating. The crowd gasped as the enforcer convulsed, a gurgling scream drowned out by the roar of burning flesh and circuitry. The second soldier moved to retaliate, but Daelen was already in motion. With a savage twist, he wrenched the fallen enforcer's plasma blade free and turned it on the second. The fight ended in a blink, a precise, brutal thrust to the chest plate, where even Dominion armor had its limits. Silence. Then, an explosion of cheers, shock, disbelief. Daelen stood, bloodied, victorious, impossible. The High Executor himself had taken notice. The very air in the Colosseum shifted, a crackle of unseen tension settling over the stands. This was no longer entertainment. It was something dangerous. And then the words came, chilling in their amusement. Bring him to me. The transition from the Crucible to the upper tiers of the Dominion's war complex was a jarring one. From the blood-soaked sands to a throne of steel and shadow, Daelen found himself in a vast chamber, a place of cold elegance. The High Executor stood before a massive viewport, gazing at the stars beyond. The void stretched endlessly, a reminder of the power the Dominion wielded. They were not rulers of planets, they were rulers of everything. Daelen did not speak. He had learned long ago that silence was a weapon of its own. The High Executor turned, the hint of a smirk playing at his lips. Predatory amusement, calculated curiosity. You are an anomaly, Daelen Voss. The words were measured, spoken with the kind of confidence that only came from someone who believed themselves untouchable. You were meant to die in the pit. Instead, you stand before me, a reminder that even the best-laid plans can shift. Daelen clenched his fists, resisting the urge to strike. You intrigue me, human. The High Executor continued, stepping closer, the glint in his eyes something between fascination and warning. And I do not let intrigue go to waste. A gesture. The doors behind Daelen hissed open, revealing something unexpected. Admiral Kalis Vorn, a traitor to his own people. A man who had stood at the war councils that condemned Daelen's rebellion to failure. Kalis did not look away. There was no shame in his expression. Only calculation. There is a war on the horizon, Voss. The High Executor's voice was almost pleasant now. Your former comrades, the ones who left you to rot, are on the brink of annihilation. Daelen's jaw tightened. He knew this. He had known it the moment he had stepped into the arena. I offer you a choice. The High Executor gestured to the viewport, to the stars beyond. You can fight for them, die with them, and become nothing more than another name in the annals of forgotten history. A pause. Or... The Executor leaned in slightly. The next words, dripping with quiet menace. You can kill them for me. The room was silent. A weighted, suffocating silence. The High Executor had played his move, a masterstroke of manipulation. He knew. He knew that Daelen's rage burned hotter than any star. That revenge was a force more potent than loyalty. Kalis stood unmoving, watching Daelen like one might observe a predator in a cage, waiting to see if it would lash out or comply. It was a test, and Daelen Voss had always been good at breaking tests. Slowly, deliberately, he exhaled. You think you own me. His voice was raw, hoarse from battle, but unwavering. A smirk flickered across the High Executor's face. "I know I do." A slow breath. A heartbeat. Then, Daelen moved. Fast. Before Kalis could react. Before the guards. At the entrance could so much as draw their weapons, Daelen lunged. One movement. One strike. Kalis Vorn never saw it coming. The High Executor's amusement faded as Daelen wrenched the plasma dagger from Kalis's belt and drove it straight into his gut. Gasps. Shouts. The chamber erupted into chaos. Kalis crumpled, his expression frozen in shock, hands scrambling to stem the flood of crimson spilling from his body. Daelen did not let him fall. He held the Admiral upright, eyes locked onto the High Executor, unflinching. Defiant. "You don't own me." The silence that followed was absolute. Then the alarms wailed. The guards surged forward. Daelen dropped Kalis's body and dove for the exit. His war had just begun. The alarms howled across the Dominion war complex, their shrill cries cutting through the sterile corridors like the shriek of a dying star. Daelen Voss ran. Blood splattered across his stolen armor, his breath ragged but his resolve sharpened to a deadly edge. He had carved his rebellion into the body of Admiral Kalis Vorn, and now the full weight of the Zenith Dominion was coming, for him. The complex was a labyrinth of cold steel and brutal efficiency, but Daelen moved with purpose. He had memorized the architecture of Dominion war facilities during his time as a commander. He knew where the bottlenecks were, where the security protocols overlapped, where the weak points in their arrogance lay. Ahead, the first squad of enforcers, converged, plasma rifles leveled, armor gleaming under the flickering emergency lights. Daelen did not hesitate. He launched himself into the fray, closing the distance before they could fire. A swift, brutal strike shattered the visor of the first enforcer, the impact sending him sprawling. The second opened fire, but Daelen twisted, the searing plasma scorching past him as he drove a stolen blade into the exposed joint of the enforcer's armor. The soldier fell with a gurgled scream. The third was smarter. He lunged back, keeping his distance, his weapon trained on Daelen's chest. But Daelen was faster. With a precise flick of his wrist, he sent the plasma dagger spinning through the air, embedding itself deep into the soldier's throat. The enforcer collapsed, twitching as blue energy crackled through his armor. Daelen retrieved the rifle from the fallen and kept moving. Time was against him. Far above, the High Executor watched the chaos unfold from the war complex's command center. His expression was unreadable, but those around him, advisors, tacticians, high-ranking officials, shifted uneasily. "He is alone," one of the officers muttered. "One man cannot escape the Dominion's grasp." The High Executor merely smiled. "That is what they said before he survived the pit, before he defied the Crucible, before he killed Kalis Vorn." A pause. His gaze remained locked onto the screen, where security feeds flickered with images of fallen enforcers, sabotaged systems, and the burning trail Daelen Voss had carved through their defenses. And yet, here he is. With a flick of his wrist, he issued a command. "Shut down all hangars, he cannot leave." Daelen reached the central hangar bay, his stolen rifle heavy in his hands. The escape vessel was in sight, so close yet impossibly far. The Dominion had anticipated this. Heavy turrets lined the perimeter, automated sentries waiting for a single wrong step. Dozens of enforcers stood between him and his only chance at freedom. He could hear their voices over the comms, the controlled urgency of a force that believed itself unstoppable. Target approaching Hangar Bay Alpha. Suppress. Terminate. This was it? Daelen exhaled. No hesitation, no doubts. He lunged forward, gunfire erupting all around him. Plasma bolts scorched the air, missing him by inches as he weaved through the chaos. He was a blur, a force of nature. He fired back in calculated bursts, striking down enforcers with ruthless efficiency. One shot to disable, one shot to finish. The turret systems locked onto him. Too many, too fast. He needed an opening. Then, an explosion rocked the hangar, flames and debris scattering in all directions. Reva Kale had arrived. The engineer-turned-rebel had been waiting, watching. She had been the only one to see the signs, to understand that Daelen Voss would never die a prisoner. Now she stood amidst the wreckage, her team of ex-gladiators and outcasts opening fire on the Dominion forces. It was chaos, pure and unrestrained. Daelen didn't waste time. He sprinted for the ship as Reva provided cover, her voice cutting through the comms. "You sure took your time, Voss." "Had to make an entrance," he shot back, sliding into the pilot's seat. The ship's engines roared to life. The hangar doors remained shut. The Dominion had sealed them, no way out. Unless, Daelen's mind raced. The ship's systems were still, synced to the Dominion's central command. If he could override the security protocols, if he could force a launch sequence, they would have no choice but to release them. Reva's voice crackled through. "Whatever you're thinking, do it fast. We're running out of time." Daelen's fingers flew across the controls, bypassing security locks, rerouting power grids. The High Executor had planned for brute force, for a desperate escape attempt. He had not planned for Daelen to take control of his own warships. With a final command, Daelen redirected all emergency power to the secondary hangar doors. The complex's automated systems, built to preserve ships at all costs, had no choice. The bay doors lurched open. Reva whooped. "You insane, brilliant bastard!" The ship launched, roaring into the void. The stars stretched before them, an endless expanse of possibility. The Dominion's pursuit vessels would come, but for now, Daelen was free. For the first time in what felt like eternity, he breathed. Reva leaned against the co-pilot's seat, grinning despite the chaos behind them. "So, what now?" Daelen stared, out into the abyss, the weight of everything pressing against his chest. "Now?" he echoed. His grip tightened. "Now, we end this." The stars outside the viewport stretched endlessly, an ocean of light and shadow indifferent to the blood and fire that had led to this moment. The stolen ship drifted in the void, its engines humming low, a temporary respite before the next battle. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of burnt circuits, blood, and sweat, the scent of survival. Daelen Voss stood at the helm, his body aching from the relentless gauntlet he had endured. The Dominion had thrown everything at him. The pit, the Crucible, their finest soldiers, and even an offer of power. They had underestimated what a man fueled by betrayal and vengeance could become. Reva Kale sat at the co-pilot station, her fingers dancing over the control panel, running diagnostics. She glanced at Daelen, studying the hard set of his jaw, the quiet storm in his eyes. "You did it, Voss." Her voice carried something between awe and exhaustion. "You broke the Dominion's chains. You're free." He didn't answer, not right away. Freedom. The word felt hollow, a cruel joke whispered into the abyss. He had escaped, yes. He had carved his way out of their grasp, turned their spectacle into his rebellion, left behind the shattered remains of their arrogance. But the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Not while the Zenith Dominion still held its boot over the throat of the galaxy. Reva sighed, leaning back. "You're not done, are you?" Daelen's fingers curled into fists. His reflection stared back at him, from the viewport. But he barely recognized the man he had become, a warrior without an army, a ghost with unfinished business. "They think this is over." His voice was quiet, but every word carried the weight of a promise. "They think I'm just another rebel who got away, that I'll disappear into the void, fade into nothing." His gaze turned steely, his resolve unbreakable. "They're wrong." The ship's comm system crackled, pulling Reva's attention away from the weight of Daelen's words. The Forsaken Legion, the ex-gladiators, the exiled, the broken survivors who had fought with him in the Crucible, were waiting. They had seen what he had done. They had seen the impossible. And now they looked to him for what came next. "Voss." A voice crackled through the comms, raw with emotion. "We followed you through hell. What now?" Daelen closed his eyes for a brief moment, exhaling through the war raging in his mind. He had fought for vengeance, for survival, for the ghosts of those abandoned in the pit. But now his war had become something more. He opened his eyes. We take the fight to them. Silence hung for a breath, then another. Then the comms erupted with agreement, with purpose. They were no longer forsaken. They were the spark that would ignite the firestorm. Riva shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. I hope they know what kind of nightmare they just created. Daelen looked at her. They will. Far across the void, in the Dominion's grand war chambers, the High Executor stood before a massive holo display. The chaos of the past days had sent shockwaves through the highest ranks of the Zenith Dominion. His advisors spoke in urgent whispers, their voices carrying worry, anger, and disbelief. A single man had defied them, had cracked the foundations of their perfect empire. He should be dead, one of them growled. He is more than a man now, another muttered. The High Executor remained still, watching the data feeds scroll across the hologram. Rebellion was stirring. Daelen Voss had done more than escape. He had become something far more dangerous than a rogue soldier. He had become a symbol. A slow smile curved the High Executor's lips. Good. His gaze hardened. Let him come. The void stretched infinitely, an expanse of cold, silent eternity. In the heart of this darkness, a lone ship drifted, its hull scarred from battle, its engines pulsing with quiet determination. Inside, Daelen Voss stood before a hollow table, the weight of the galaxy pressing against his shoulders. The ship's dim lighting cast shadows across his face, etching deep lines of exhaustion and resolve. Before him, a map of the Dominion's vast empire flickered, a web of power and control spanning countless worlds. The Zenith Dominion still reigned, but now they had something to fear. The comms buzzed. We're ready, Voss. Riva's voice crackled through the static, carrying a mix of excitement and wariness. Say the word. Daelen's eyes flicked across the map, his mind calculating, dissecting, forging the next move in a war that had only just begun. The Forsaken Legion had gathered. Rebels, mercenaries, exiles, those who had suffered under the Dominion's rule and now sought retribution. He had given them something they had long been denied, a purpose, a leader, a war worth fighting. He exhaled, his voice low, steady. We strike their supply lines first, starve them out, make them bleed. A pause. Then Riva's response, tinged with the sharp edge of a grin. Thought you'd say that. The ship's engines roared to life, the glow of thrusters burning through. The blackness. Across the sector, others followed, a scattered rebellion coalescing into something dangerous, something unstoppable. The Zenith Dominion had spent years forging their empire through fear and control. Now fear would be turned against them. In the towering heart of the Dominion's capital, the High Executor stood before a grand, endless viewport. The stars stretched before him, uncaring and unyielding. Behind him, a group of Dominion strategists whispered in tense, hushed voices. Daelen Voss had survived. Worse, he had become something more. A small insurgency, one officer muttered. A nuisance at best. The High Executor let the words linger before speaking, his voice a quiet blade against the murmurs. No. He turned, his cold gaze cutting through the room. He is not a nuisance, he is a lesson we failed to learn. A pause. And lessons must be erased. A command was given. The holomap shifted, displaying Daelen's stolen ship, his growing rebellion, his every possible move. The Dominion's war machine was already turning, calculating, adapting. Deploy the Apex fleet. Burn every system that harbors them. Let the galaxy see what happens to those who defy us. Silence. A single breath of hesitation. Then, the officers nodded, their compliance absolute. Across the Dominion's vast empire, war engines stirred. The hunt for Daelen Voss had begun, and the galaxy braced for what came next.